Imagine, for a second, being at home on a freezing night, listening to the sound of heavy rain outside, when suddenly, someone knocks at your door. Augusto, a millionaire known for his cold heart, goes to answer, already annoyed. On the other side, he finds a scene impossible to ignore. A little girl, 7 years old, completely soaked, face dirty, shivering, with a baby practically passed out in her small arms. She doesn't ask for money or food. She just asks for one thing. "Sir, please, can you give my little brother a hug? He's so cold and I can't keep him warm by myself." At that moment, Augusto's world is turned upside down. He wonders, is it just another scam? Or is this real? What would you do when faced with such a simple and so desperate a request? Get ready, because this story is about to show you that miracles appear when you least expect them. And what happens from here on out, no one could have guessed. The rain wouldn't let up that night. It was one of those storms that punish, you know? The wind stings your face, even worse if you've got nowhere to hide. Laura could barely feel her toes anymore, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her forehead, face streaked with dirt. Every so often, she'd try to pull the old holy blanket tighter around her brother, doing her best to shield him. The baby clung to her. Lucas was only 8 months old, letting out soft whimpers, sometimes hiccuping from the cold, from hunger. He tried not to cry, but it was hard. She watched the lights of the cars passing by and imagined people comfortable behind those closed windows. Warm, the smell of dinner in the air, while out here the world was nothing but strange noises, thick raindrops on the asphalt, distant horns. It felt like everyone was trying to rush somewhere, everyone except herself. All she wanted was a place that didn't hurt beneath her feet, somewhere Lucas could sleep without shivering. The street was dark. Right below each street lamp, you could see puddles turning into little rivers, rain splashing up mud as high as her calves. Laura needed to keep moving. Every step was heavy, her shoes useless now, sloshing with water. The cold seeped in through the wet fabric, from all sides. It felt like knives, cutting straight through. The cars wouldn't even slow down. Some splashed her on purpose, others just ignored her, barely aware she existed. But she could see people's eyes, for a split second, in those moments when a light turned red. Some rolled up their windows, impatient, staring straight ahead. There was one old man with a white beard who met her gaze for a moment, held it, and then quickly turned away, like the weight of looking was too much. Laura didn't really know where to go. All she felt was fear thumping in her chest. Worse than the cold, she thought, was this fear of losing Lucas. She remembered the street stories about kids vanishing, bad people, and even the ones who'd show up to split up brothers and sisters, putting them in different shelters. It made her heart ache. Just don't let go of Lucas. Never, was all she could think. He was all she had left. The little baby clung to her, trying to find warmth, his tiny hand clutching the sour-smelling blanket. Laura paused a moment under the overhang of a closed shop, using her shoulder to wipe her eyes. Who knew if it was rain or tears? She heard Lucas give a weak little cry, that kind of sound that hurts more because you know it's pure pain. She tried rocking him gently, pressing his cheek to hers. "Shoo, little brother, don't cry," she whispered, mostly trying to convince herself it'd be all right. The weight on her shoulders was crushing. Laura was only 7, but out there she felt like a grown-up, facing a world with a bravery she didn't know she had. Memories of her mother flooded in at these moments. Her mom singing by the fire, brushing her hair, promising she'd always keep her safe. But now, Laura was the mother. And everything felt so far away, so impossible. A skinny dog shuffled by, rooting through the trash. Laura thought for a second to follow it, see if she could find something to eat. But Lucas looked pale, his breathing weaker. The urge to just sit down and cry along with him nearly overtook her, except she was scared she'd never be able to get back up. Her stomach was a hollow ache. It had been ages since they'd had real food. Sometimes they'd find stale bread, a bite of fruit, maybe those candy wrappers with the sweet scent still clinging, but almost always empty. Laura had learned to ignore the pain in her stomach. She just wanted to protect Lucas, even if that meant going without. Every so often, she'd look around, trying to imagine what could happen. The wind picked up, a thunderclap splitting the sky. She jerked, holding Lucas close. He, not understanding, just tightened his grip on the blanket. Laura took a deep breath. She just wished someone, anyone, would actually look at them, properly look. offer a kind word, something to warm them. But that night, there was only silence between thunderclaps and rain. The street nearly deserted, yellow lights wavering on the asphalt, that smell of wet gasoline. Laura tried to figure out how life had turned into this so suddenly. Once, her mom used to say they were a family. Now, it was as if they were just two little ghosts no one could see. She looked off into the distance, saw the mansions on the other side of the avenue. Huge gates, sodden gardens, golden lights in the windows. She imagined what it must be like inside. Fires crackling, hot food, people laughing. Nearby, in the shadows of the grandest gate, a security guard stood watch, holding a big umbrella, a stony face. Laura didn't even dare ask for help there. She knew she'd be shooed away before anyone offered kindness. The wind cut colder, getting under the old blanket. Lucas started to shiver harder. Laura felt panic rising. She just wanted to find a hole, anything, to protect her brother. "It's going to pass, Lucas, it's going to pass," she whispered, hugging him with all her might. The baby, spent, let out a ragged cry and finally drifted off, for now, out of exhaustion. For a moment, Laura stopped walking, just staring at the shimmering ground, the raindrops making strange shapes. She coughed quietly, wiped her nose on the back of her hand. A fleeting thought crossed her mind, one nobody should have. Will any grown-up ever look at me the way my mom did? She felt anger and grief. But deep inside, a tiny spark of hope survived. She was just a little girl, small, dirty, lost. But that night would be burned into her memory forever. It was like the whole sky was crying with her. But with every rumble of thunder, Laura promised herself she wouldn't let Lucas be cold and alone. While she still had strength, it was her against the world. The sound of the rain made it feel even colder than it really was. Every drop falling on the far side of the bridge sounded heavy, like it was falling straight onto Laura's heart. The space there was tiny, just some damp cardboard boxes, a blanket that had once been blue but was now almost gray, and two children so alone it felt impossible that anyone could see them. Laura sat cross-legged, Lucas cradled in her lap. He was wrapped up to his chin in the blanket, but shivered just the same. The tip of his nose was red, softly sobbing. She tried to rock him, hoping that if he remembered their mother, her kindness, the warmth, maybe he'd stop crying. But he didn't, and that hurt her much more than the cold, more than her empty stomach. Her stomach rumbled again, loud, as if her body was trying to warn her it couldn't go on much longer. She closed her eyes and breathed deep, but just for a moment. Fear wouldn't let her rest. Every sound on the wet street above made her jump. Fear of someone dangerous, fear of a police officer, fear of losing the only scrap of family she had left, Lucas. She looked around. The smell of damp earth and old trash. A broken bottle, the remains of a lost umbrella, empty wrappers someone had tossed from a car. No one ever looked under the bridge. No one cared who was sleeping there. Laura thought about her mother, about the fire, the smoke, the shouting. She tried to push those ugly memories away. She had to be strong now, had to look after Lucas. He didn't understand any of it, didn't know why they were there. All he knew was cold and hunger. And his little eyes, so small, still searched for a friendly face. The rain started pounding harder on the metal sheets nearby. Every thunderclap made Lucas flinch in her arms. Laura hugged him tighter, speaking softly, almost whispering. "It's okay, Lucas. I'm here, all right? I won't let anyone take you away. I promise, little brother." But even she could feel how fragile that promise was inside her. She didn't know how much longer she could last. Her hair was glued to her forehead, her shirt wet through. The blanket had long since lost its warmth. She knew that one more night down here, Lucas might not make it. His skin was cold, and when she gently brushed his cheek, she realized he was hotter than he should be. Was he running a fever? Fear swelled, her throat tight. She looked up at the sky, at the dark outside the bridge, searching for any kind of light. The houses seemed so far away, the cars speeding past, never stopping. She wondered if anyone could hear Lucas's tiny cries. Would anyone help? But nobody stopped. Nobody wanted to see. She rocked him again. Somewhere nearby, a motorcycle roared past, its headlights sweeping the entrance to the bridge for an instant. Laura almost remembered what it was like to watch cartoons on TV, to smell fresh bread in the morning, her mom's laughter. Now, there was only silence beyond the rumble of cars and rain. And fear. Her mind wandered far. What if an adult found them here? Would they split her up from Lucas? Take him far away? She squeezed his tiny arm, so thin, so frail, and felt a silent, desperate scream ripping through her chest. She realized there was no point waiting anymore. Staying here meant watching her brother get worse. Staying meant leaving him alone in the world. Her stomach twisted, but what hurt most was the fear of losing Lucas, of not being able to protect him. She tried to hold back tears, but one slipped through. She swiped it away before the baby could notice. Laura stood up slowly, her whole body aching, feet frozen. The blanket felt as heavy as stones, but she tucked it carefully around Lucas, pressing his little face to her chest. He clung to her sweatshirt, as if he knew it was the only safe place left. His crying faded to soft, tired hiccups. Inside her head, she started a silent conversation. You need help, Laura. You have to find someone. There's no other way. Should she ask for money? No. She remembered the time she asked for food and got called a thief. Should she beg for shelter? She was terrified they'd take her little brother away. But tonight, the cold was worse. Lucas seemed weaker, and if he fell asleep, she was afraid he'd never wake up. The darkness under the bridge was a terrifying silence. Even with all the sounds outside, between the two of them, it was like the world had stopped. The warmth of her hands wasn't enough anymore. Laura took a deep breath, made up her mind. She was leaving. She'd knock on the fanciest, brightest house she could find. It didn't matter if she was scared. It didn't matter if they yelled at her. All she wanted was for Lucas to be warm. That's it. Just a hug, someplace for him to stop shaking. She looked one last time at the scrap of cardboard, the corner where they'd slept. Maybe she'd never come back. She hugged Lucas tight, felt his little face slip into her neck, and in that moment, the only thing she had left was the kind of courage that only a child with no other options can find. Legs trembling, she stepped out from under the bridge, carrying Lucas, the rain beating down on the two of them. The cold stabbed, fear closed in, but she went anyway. Because now, asking for help was the only chance to save her brother. Alone in the middle of the wet street, the only wish, the only plea, they just needed someone, any door, to open for them. The sky was heavy, thick clouds covering everything, pouring rain without mercy. Every drop felt icy when it hit her skin. It hurt. Laura pressed her bare feet down into the muddy sidewalk, the cold climbing up her legs. The wind blew hard, tearing at her old dress, wet and glued to her thin body. Her arm wrapped tightly around Lucas, trying her best to shield him. But the baby was shivering anyway, his face buried in her shoulder, quietly mumbling with cold and hunger. Facing forward was terrifying. The mansion's gate looked like something out of a movie. Huge, tall, all dark iron with gold tips at the top. On the other side, deep inside, she could see the house glowing, a few windows lit, the shapes of big furniture and carpets. Warmth. Safety. A world as far from under the bridge as you could imagine, where everything was dark and smelled bad. Laura stood still for a few seconds, staring at a gate that seemed impossible to cross. She wanted to turn back, find another way. But then she looked at Lucas again, saw his little mouth trembling, his eyes heavy, drifting off in the cold. She felt a fear she couldn't even explain. She couldn't let him get sick. He was all she had. The sound of cars was faint, distant, muffled from the other side. The rain pooled at her feet, soaked right through her battered shoes. Thunder cracked far away. She took a deep breath, felt her heart pounding in her throat. She was all alone, no one around. It had to be now. She moved closer to the gate. A smell of wet grass drifted from the huge garden. Beyond were tall trees, flowers, even an angel statue standing guard, wings open wide. So beautiful, so otherworldly. Her fingers were stiff with cold, but she managed. She found a spot on the gate that made a different noise if you knocked. Trembling, she raised her hand and knocked. 1, 2, 3 times. Each knock hard, laced with hope that someone, some grown-up, would hear that it mattered. At first, only the dull thud of her fist and the relentless rain. Nothing. Lucas whimpered again, shifting in her arms, letting out a tired little cry, sounding spent. Laura whispered softly in his ear, tried rubbing his back, tucked in the old scrap of cloth, but none of it made much difference. Time trickled slowly by. She scratched her nose without meaning to, catching the smell of herself, sweat, the street, her brother's dirty blanket. Shame hit her. Maybe whoever answered wouldn't even want to look at her, so filthy and ragged. She wanted to cry but forced it down so as not to scare Lucas anymore. She saw a light turn on near the main door that was far back, then heard a muffled bark from somewhere behind. There was a dog in the yard. She thought of running. She was scared of big dogs. But she stayed. Her life didn't matter, only her brother's did. For him, she'd face anything. Suddenly, in the mansion's windows, a shadow moved. A curtain pulled back just a little. Was someone watching her? She couldn't tell. But, a few moments later, the entryway lights flared on, probably some sensor, flooding the whole yard with light. Laura stood out starkly. Shame squeezed at her again. She hugged Lucas tighter, trying to shield his face from the cold and wind. The pain from the cold was getting worse now, her fingers cramping up, her legs trembling, from fear, from exhaustion. But she couldn't leave, not now. If it didn't work here, it wouldn't work anywhere. Desperation rose inside her, like a wave. The sound of the rain faded. The only thing that mattered was the hope that someone would hear. Another thunderclap rattled the sky. Laura, without thinking, knocked again. This time, her arm hurt from the effort. She knocked harder, wishing someone inside could feel how urgent it was just from the sound. Then she pressed her cold forehead to the bars, closed her eyes for a second, praying softly, even though she wasn't really sure how. All she asked for was for someone to show up, just that. Baby Lucas curled in tighter, let out a worn-out, hungry whimper. Laura adjusted him again, tried to cover his chest with the cloth, almost nothing left dry. Her heart started aching as if it were being squeezed and squeezed. She looked back, saw the empty street, the bridge's shadow swallowing up the rest of the city. She couldn't go back. She couldn't try another house tonight. Not like this. All that was left was to knock one more time. She breathed deep, tried to wipe her face on the back of her hand, but everything was soaked. It made no difference. In the silence of that rich garden, the only sounds were her brother's crying and her breathing. Time froze again. She just looked through the iron bars, trying to sense if anyone was coming. The warmth from those lights inside seemed a distant promise. For a moment, she wanted so badly to be invisible, to slip under the gate like a kitten, to just have a little of that shelter on the other side. She was just a kid, and she held on to one last hope, that a door would open, a window, that someone would answer. Alone in the dark, she felt so small compared to a world so big, so closed off. And she waited, still hugging her baby brother, holding on even as her body ached, the cold in their bones, the two of them standing there with only the sound of hope quietly knocking on the giant gate. The door creaked open, heavy over the sound of rain. The noise echoed down the long hallway inside the mansion, and for a moment, it felt like time froze. Augusto appeared on the other side, wrapped in a thick, expensive robe, the kind you only see on TV. He looked down, face hard, cold, almost no expression at all. Not a trace of kindness, just exhaustion, the kind of tiredness you get when you've seen too much and stopped believing in anyone or anything. The yellow light from the entry hit Laura and Lucas. The two of them, standing there, shivering from the cold. Laura's clothes were stuck to her body, soaked, dirty smudges on the sleeve, a ripped hem. The baby's crying was a tired, weak sort of sound, like he'd run out of strength. His hair was stuck to his forehead, his lips tinged blue. Augusto barely blinked. He spoke, sharp, almost loud. "What do you two want here?" Laura took a step back, nearly tripped over the wet doormat. She bit her lip hard, looked down. Her face was red. Who could tell if it was from shame, cold, or fear? When she looked up, her eyes were shining like wet glass. Silence pressed in tight. You could hear the rain on the roof, the wind outside, a distant rumble of thunder, as if the sky was angry too. She pulled the baby closer, as if he were a shield. Her breathing was short, afraid her voice would fail. Still, she managed to whisper, so softly, the kind of plea only a child forced to grow up too soon can make. Just a little space for him. He's so cold. I promise we won't stay. Just somewhere to protect Lucas from the wind. The baby's name came out trembling, full of all her love. Lucas clutched the collar of her shirt, half asleep and unaware. Augusto stared at them, but his eyes didn't soften. Not a muscle of his face moved. He sighed, frustrated. He glanced back at the living room. Thick carpet, heated walls, spotless sofa. A couple of seconds passed, and he looked again at the two in the doorway. His look was the kind that refuses to believe, convinced it's all some trick, a con, a lie. He'd heard too many stories like this, lost too much, didn't want to feel pity anymore. You know this is private property, right? Next time, I'll call the police, he said, voice like ice. Laura clung even harder to the baby, squeezing her arm so tight she almost hurt herself. She didn't even have tears left, but couldn't stop shaking. Augusto made a move to shut the door, but the baby let out a choked sob and started coughing, a cough that hurt just to listen to. Laura's eyes shut tight, desperation knotting in her chest as she realized how tiny she was in the world, how little she could do to protect her brother. Inside, Augusto felt a sharp discomfort. He tried to convince himself it was just another performance, nothing real. Still, something about the girl's fragility, the way she hid her own pain to shield the baby, poked at something buried deep down inside him. The smell of rain, the cold sneaking in through the half-open door. Augusto adjusted his robe, ran his hand through his gray hair, frustrated. You could see in his eyes that for a fleeting second, he remembered another child. A quick flash of memory he hurried to push away. His face closed over, hard as ever. How much do you want? 50? 100? You're not going to fool me, he said, already reaching for his wallet by reflex, like it was easier to believe in a scam than in someone else's pain. Laura shook her head, breathless, every muscle tense. It's not that. I don't want money, she said, her voice barely there but steady. I just want him to be warm. Just tonight. Please. The corridor behind them was hushed, just the ticking of an expensive clock marking time. The house dog barked somewhere in the back, but no one else appeared. Only Augusto, standing there with that stone expression. He looked at the baby again, noticed Lucas was going limp, and it made him restless in a strange, uneasy way, like he was afraid of seeing vulnerability where he just wanted to see lies. He didn't know what to do. A million things ran through his mind, stories of scams, children used as bait for adults, fear of falling into a trap. On the other hand, there was that old feeling of loss, the ghost of the daughter who'd never come back, aching in some hidden place he tried to ignore. While they stood there, the rain grew heavier. Drops pounded the roof, almost screaming. Laura wouldn't let go for a second, the smell of mold and sweat clinging to her jacket. The baby's tiny finger reached for her hair, tangling in the hope that the night would pass soon. Augusto's face gave nothing away, but if you looked closely, his eyes weren't quite as cold as before. Inside, he was fighting himself. He wanted to close the door, to end this. But he couldn't. He knew that if he left, he'd spend the night listening for the girl's cry every time the wind shook the trees outside. He opened the door a little wider, as impatiently as possible, without saying a word. He just motioned for them to come in, a stiff gesture, as if he was determined not to care. Laura hesitated, looked around like she was still waiting for something bad to happen, then took 2 small steps, her bare feet on the cold entryway floor. Lucas nuzzled into her neck, worn out. Augusto closed the door slowly, the sound echoing through the bright hall. Nobody said anything. In the silence, only the sound of their breathing. He walked ahead, not looking back, jaw locked tight. Laura followed behind, moving slowly, her heart racing. With every step, she noticed how different this floor felt, so far from the cold pavement outside. Augusto seemed angry on the outside. Inside, who could say? But in that big house, all of a sudden, there was more life than there had been in years. Augusto was already pushing the door shut, his face set like stone, hands steady on the handle. Outside, the rain got even heavier now, as if the raging wind wanted to remind everyone there was nowhere to run tonight. Laura, standing there wide-eyed, mouth open, clutching Lucas so tightly it was as if she wanted to hide him inside her threadbare, soaked dress, refused to move. Lucas whimpered softly, the sound of an exhausted baby, the kind of noise only a child who's really been cold and hungry can make. A small wail slicing through the night. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air, warm and inviting. Outside, only the smell of wet street, garbage, fear. The security guard at the gate hadn't seen a thing, distracted by soccer on TV. Go on, girl. Find somewhere else. This isn't a place for that, Augusto grumbled, trying not to look at the baby too closely. He'd seen scenes like this before, kids begging, spinning stories. The neighborhood had become like that lately, he thought. People didn't respect closed doors anymore. Laura stayed standing there, shivering. Her chin trembled in a quick, nervous tick. She took a deep breath, pulled Lucas closer. Her eyes, seeming to already know nothing good would come from here, dropped to the ground. But before Augusto could close the door, she looked up again. Her eyes were full of tears, yet she tried to smile. Such a forced, yet determined smile. And then her voice came, tiny and weaker than ever. "Mister, please, you don't have to give me anything. Not money, not food. Please, I just want a hug for my brother. He's all cold, just for a little bit, so he doesn't get really sick. I don't need it. I just want him to feel someone warming him up the way Mommy used to." Augusto stopped. He took a deep breath and just watched her, standing there in the doorway, not moving, just staring. Long seconds with no words from anyone. Laura didn't look away, almost as if for a moment she'd forgotten to be scared, like she was holding back tears just for her brother's sake. Water dripped from her hair and the baby's, little rivers running down their chins. The baby sniffled, too tired to cry anymore, melting into his sister's arms. The smell was strong, cold, rain, stale sweat, and that sour note that every sad baby seems to have. Augusto wanted to say something. So many words in his mind, none of them coming out. His throat was tight, tied in a knot. For a split second, an image of a small child flashed in front of his eyes, but he didn't even blink. Stony on the outside, but inside, something strange started to happen. An odd, uncomfortable heat in his chest, the urge to shout. His hand on the doorknob trembled, just a little, but he wouldn't let anyone notice. Suddenly, he felt ashamed of his expensive robe, the heavy watch on his wrist, everything soft and warm in that house. That little girl, asking only for a hug. Not a trick, not a request for money, not some adult's game. Just the simplest thing in the world. Laura started to cry, louder this time. And it wasn't whining or a tantrum. It was a choked sob from someone who'd spent all day pretending to be strong, but was about to give up. She shuffled a step closer, still clutching Lucas, pulled a thin hand out of her torn shirt, and wiped her eye, apologizing for her suffering with that embarrassed gesture. For a few seconds, time stopped. Outside, a dog barked, a car braked out on the avenue. Inside Augusto's house, all you could hear was rain dripping onto the entrance rug, staining the shiny wood floor. He crouched slowly, as if he hardly knew what he was doing. He looked at the baby's face, the mouth parted, cheeks sunken, skin dotted red from cold and hunger. Laura, sensing something was about to change, held her brother tighter and made a pleading, wordless look. Augusto stretched out his arms, his hands large. It was almost automatic, almost out of his control. All he knew was that he couldn't close that door while those two were standing outside tonight. He picked Lucas up awkwardly, clumsy, the way someone does who hasn't held a baby in years. The boy was so light, frighteningly light, the kind of light that only comes from hunger, lack of sleep, and never truly being held. Augusto felt the baby cling to his chest, seeking warmth, as if he didn't know this stranger but knew he needed him. Laura watched, hands to her face, tears streaming quietly. The scene was silent, almost sacred. The rain beating down, the world hushed. Only the baby's weak breathing against the businessman's plush robe. The baby's smell rose up to Augusto's face. The heat from his body lined up with Augusto's chest, a weird combination of discomfort and something good, something he'd forgotten. The baby whimpered, then sighed, burrowing deeper into the man's chest as if he'd just found the shelter he'd been looking for. Augusto looked at Laura. She was shaking, but now it was from emotion, not just cold. The gratitude in her eyes seemed far older than she was, so heavy, so worn for someone so young. For a second, Augusto thought of his daughter, same age, those happy days that would never return. That pain cut deep, like a blow inside his chest. On the outside, Augusto still held himself with the air of a hard man. Inside, a world was breaking, shame, shock, and the first glimmer of acceptance. Holding Lucas, one thought went through him. How does a child ask for a hug on a night like this, and not a plate of food? How can a kid be more grown-up than most grown-ups? Laura edged closer, not even asking permission, her eyes huge. The baby finally relaxed, warm, mouth closed, breathing slow and steady. And that was when Augusto realized he couldn't send the girl away now, or turn away from whatever that moment was waking inside him. He didn't know it yet, but he would never be the same. Augusto stood at the entrance for a few moments, the lights from the mansion reflecting on the raindrops spilling from the girl's hair. He held the door half open, his stare hard, trying to hide any sign of feeling. His gaze flickered between her little face and the baby bundled in a dingy blanket. Only the hissing of the rain outside broke the tense silence. Laura stepped in slowly, as if afraid to touch anything. The floor was warm, smooth, so different from the wet, icy sidewalk she'd just left. She couldn't help herself. She let out a tiny breath, a sigh of relief so clear it nearly sounded like a sob. But she didn't really let her guard down. Her eyes clung to Lucas, feeling his weight in her arms. Fear still gripped her, even with the warm air on her dirty skin. Augusto closed the door gently, making as little noise as possible. He wouldn't let go of the handle, as if at any moment he might need to open it again and put the kids back out on the street. He stepped forward just a little, but kept his distance. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, steady and wary. His dark suit clung to his damp body. For a second, he ran a hand over his face, nervous, even trying to hide from himself how much all this was getting to him. The mansion felt like another world. Thick carpet, huge sofa, scent of polish and cleaning products. A fire burned in the corner of the living room, the flames warming the air nearby. Laura took it all in wide-eyed, but didn't touch a thing. She stood upright, her soaked socks dripping onto the thick rug. Lucas whimpered softly, exhausted, and she fussed with the blanket, nestling his face close against her chest. She wanted to say thank you, but you could see her voice caught. Her heart raced, pounding so hard it felt like he might hear it. Whenever it was time to thank him for the warmth, the fear of being sent away came back even stronger. Augusto's face hardened a bit more, wary, one hand always near his phone pocket. He lingered there, pretending distraction, but never taking his eyes off the two of them. Inside, Augusto felt like a stranger in his own house. It had been a long time, maybe years, since he'd let anyone unknown cross through that door. Every corner of the mansion brought back old, painful memories. He looked at Laura and saw his own daughter, years ago, playing in the living room with that same smile. He wanted to run away, to scream, but he stayed silent, just breathing deeply, fighting down his old pride. Laura was taking everything in, down to the smallest detail. A painting on the wall of a little blonde girl smiling. Tons of beautiful toys lined up in a cabinet, all clean and untouched, silent for ages. That hurt, because she'd never had anything like it, nothing to play with or hold. Her hands trembled, cold all the way inside, even with the warmth of the fire. Her body was already used to hunger, but to be afraid again, that you never get used to. She squeezed Lucas tighter, feeling his sweaty forehead against her chest. She realized, too, that Augusto wasn't as giant as he looked on TV. Standing near the door, he just seemed lonely. Tired eyes, heavy steps. It looked like he was struggling to believe this was real. Part of him wanted to ask who they really were, but the other part just wanted quiet. The rain beat harder against the window. Outside, there was only darkness and the sound of water on the leaves. Inside, the only noise was the fire crackling and the heavy breathing of the baby, sleeping fitfully in his sister's arms. Laura shifted her weight from one foot to the other, half embarrassed by the grime on her clothes. Secretly, she hoped not to leave stains on the carpet. She didn't want to give him any reason to send them away. Augusto watched all this from a distance. He tapped his foot, impatient. He thought about asking her to put the baby on the sofa, but he didn't. The boy might be sick, and that made everything more complicated. He searched Laura's face for some hidden intent, some trick. But the way she held her brother, shielding him with her own body, wasn't fake. She hadn't asked for anything for herself, only for the baby. At this point, Augusto opened his mouth to ask where their mother was. The question hung in the air, unspoken. The silence grew again, heavier than before. His face creased, old anger tangled now with something new. Pity, but also fear of getting involved. His daughter flashed into his mind again and again, like a wound that never quite heals. Laura rocked Lucas, trying to soothe him. The baby coughed, a hoarse, weak sound. She ran her hand over his back, murmuring softly for his ears only. Her eyes never left Augusto, but there was a distance there, a barrier of years, of class, of pain. She knew, deep down, that this could end any second, that a shout, a "get out," could throw them back outside. And even so, for a moment, Laura let herself settle on both feet, feeling the warmth creep up through her toes. Not much, but better than the freezing night outside. A different strength stirred in her. Not courage, maybe hope. A faint spark beneath all that uncertainty. Augusto sat in the armchair, still at a distance, tapping his fingers lightly on its arm. His gaze seemed to search for something beyond the grime, beyond the frightened child. He wanted to find a lie, but all he saw was fear and care. And for a split second, he felt something soften inside him, almost regret. In that quiet, the minutes moved slowly. The rain gradually faded to background noise, but the chill between them remained. Augusto looked at the two, fighting with himself. It was easy to ignore poverty on TV, but hard to face it right here, in the eyes of a child clutching her sick brother. Laura knew, nothing here was promised. She could lose it all if Augusto changed his mind. So she kept holding Lucas, warming him with her own body, and kept looking back at the man. Not asking, not expecting too much. Just existing there, balanced between suspicion and care. The mansion was silent, the kind of heavy silence that makes you feel you don't really belong. The rain kept pounding on the glass, streaming down the windows, almost as if trying to break in and remind everyone that the world outside was still cold, no matter how thick the walls or soft the rugs. Laura curled up in a big armchair, which still held the fading heat of the fireplace. Her baby brother slept sprawled in her lap, his face half-hidden, breathing noisily. Sometimes, Lucas made that sound, half cough, half chest wheeze, and Laura felt her skin prickle with fear. It was a wet, strange cough. She tried to get him more comfortable, pulling the blanket over him, doing what she'd watched her mother do on so many nights in the shack, back when they still had a mother. She couldn't sleep, not with the strange, unfamiliar smell all around, not with the soft noises of Augusto's footsteps. He paced upstairs in the hallway, back and forth, his shoes creaking quietly on the wooden floor. Even when he was out of sight, she could feel his eyes close by, full of questions and almost no trust at all. Time seemed stuck. Every time she blinked, it took forever to open her eyes again. But in that darkness, the little thought kept coming. What if they had to go? What if he made them leave? Or worse, what if he wanted to separate her from Lucas? Laura's mind came up with questions she wished she'd never thought of. Lucas coughed harder and whimpered, a weak, pitiful sound. On the bridge it was worse. She had to soothe him with her own voice, tell stories about the sky. Couldn't even use a real blanket. But even here, strangely, the fear didn't go away. She listened to her brother's chest, hoping the fever would break on its own, trying to believe holding him tight was enough. In the kitchen, Augusto turned on the low light. He leaned against the sink, turning the faucet on just to watch the water run. Not thirsty at all, just needing some other kind of noise. He looked out at the rain beating down, the streetlights spotlighting an empty yard. It wasn't bedtime, not for him. He picked up his phone, stared at the screen, his finger hovering above the number for social services. It's the right thing, Augusto, he thought. You're helping everyone in their place. You already opened the door. That's enough. Not your problem now. But there was no certainty in his face. He was pale, tired, deep lines across his forehead. His eyes flicked to the photograph on the shelf, the one where his daughter smiles from another time. Her blonde hair, missing tooth, hugging a battered old bear that was gone now. He tried to look away, but couldn't. The old anger and sadness tangled inside him, like nothing he did now would ever fix the past. He picked up the phone to call, almost pressed the button. Stopped again. He climbed the stairs softly, barely making a sound, just to check. He found Laura still awake, eyes so huge, so unsure she even dared to ask anything. Lucas was burning up, his limp little hand thrown across her chest. "What is it?" he whispered, trying not to sound nervous. She just shook her head, trying to hide her face. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him. But he saw. It was fear, worry, and a deep loneliness, the kind only a child knows when they have nowhere left to go. Augusto came closer, like he was going to say something important, but nothing came out at first. He looked at Lucas, sweating, sweaty hair sticking to his forehead, skin too hot to be normal. He remembered his own daughter falling ill, years ago, a sharp stab of memory. That terrifying feeling of not being able to do anything fast enough. His chest tightened. He's got a fever, Augusto said, more to himself. But Laura heard and hugged her brother tighter. She tried to say he was okay, the way adults try to reassure, but he knew he wasn't. It hurt to see a child, so tiny, trying to act grown because the world left her no choice. He took a deep breath, stood there a moment looking at them, as if searching for courage or something inside himself. That person he'd once been, the person who really cared, before all the hurt. "Where's your mother?" he whispered, but immediately regretted it. Remembering her story, the fire, the loneliness, a girl caring for a baby alone. No mother. No one. The rain intensified, drumming on everything. Augusto went to the closet for a clean towel, walked back slowly, handed it to Laura's small hands without a word. She took it with a tiny, "Thank you," eyes shining with relief and sorrow. He stayed there a few more minutes, watching the two of them. The silence was strange, thick with everything unsaid. Augusto thought about the choices he'd have to make. He knew all about money, numbers, contracts, but had no idea what to do with two small lives in front of him. The fear of making a mistake was enormous. After an unmeasured time, he went back to his own room. But his cell phone remained by the bed, screen glowing, waiting for a decision. Augusto couldn't lie down. He sat there, head bowed, hands shaking slightly. The photo of his daughter still looked out at him, honest, pure in a way that time hadn't shown in years. And that night, no one really slept. Not Laura, cradling her sick brother, not Augusto, stuck between his past and all that might change. Outside, the rain just kept pouring, as if it wanted to wash away the last trace of pain lingering in that vast house, as everyone waited for a choice that seemed impossible to make. Augusto barely closed his eyes that night. Every time Lucas coughed, the sound seemed to cut through the thick mansion walls and hit him straight in the chest. It was late. Early morning, really, and everything was dark, a faint glow from a street lamp making shadowy shapes on the furniture. In the guest room, Laura tried to comfort her brother. She sat on the bed, knees up, resting little Lucas on her lap, his tiny body pressed against her chest like she could protect him from the whole world. He shivered, but his skin was burning, too hot. The smell of sweat rose from his hair, and his breath was short, ragged, almost like a soundless sob. Laura looked around, searching for any way to make things better. The room was pretty, soft carpet, white sheets, but none of that mattered. All she wanted was for her brother to get well. Outside, rain drizzled endlessly, tapping out a sad rhythm on the window panes. It was hard even to imagine that just a few streets away, they'd spent weeks freezing under the bridge. A minute, 2, half an hour, the fever just climbed. Laura began calling. "Mister, please come here. Please." Augusto, who had been lying awake, listening to everything, jumped out of bed. His heart was pounding, feelings too tangled to name. He opened the door cautiously, that careful way of someone who doesn't know if they can trust. He found Laura quietly crying, eyes wide and desperate, cheeks wet with tears and the baby's fever. "He's so hot, mister. I don't know what to do. Please help. Lucas won't stop sweating and he won't really wake up. It's so bad. I'm scared." She spoke through tears, pressing her little brother close. She was only 7 years old, but in that moment, she seemed to carry the world on her shoulders. Her face had that look of long-standing worry, the kind adults get. The panic in her eyes, a brightness that begged for help. Augusto felt the floor drop out from under him. A chill ran up his spine. The smell of fever, of Lucas's sweat, clashed with the memory of his own daughter, so frail between white sheets years ago. Back then, he'd thought money could fix everything. He'd hired doctors, bought medicine, prayed as hard as he could afford, but it hadn't worked. That whole night replayed in his mind, every second cutting anew. He sat beside the girl without even thinking. Tried to speak, but only managed a, "Let me see." He asked permission softly, placed his hand on Lucas's forehead. His hand, usually cold, was scorched by the heat radiating from the kid's skin. He held his breath. This wasn't normal. Something turned inside him, a new discomfort. Not irritation, not impatience, but fear. Fear of losing another child, even a stranger. Even though he didn't want to care, he did. Augusto jumped up and nearly tripped over a rug. "Wait, I'll get something." He hurried off to rummage in the hallway cupboard for a thermometer, some kind of fever medicine. He had no idea what babies could even take. His hands shook as he sorted through bottles, tiny labels he could barely read for nerves. The rain sounded louder now, rattling the roof as if the whole world was sobbing along. Laura hummed to Lucas, but the baby was limp, lost. His cries were faint now, just little whimpers of pain. She gazed at the door, waiting for Augusto to return, clutching her brother as if he'd vanish at any second. Augusto had the phone in his hand, organizing his thoughts at lightning speed. I need a doctor. Now. He called the doctor he'd used before, asked, without that usual arrogance, but in a voice right at the edge, to come, even in the middle of the night, no matter what. Then he rushed back to the room, sitting at the edge of the bed again. The girl looked at him, hoping for answers, eyes wide and worn, but still somehow full of hope. Will he be okay? She whispered. Augusto breathed deep. He wanted so badly to promise everything, but right then he couldn't lie. Instead, he grabbed a clean cloth, dampened it, and began wiping Lucas's forehead, clumsy but gentle, maybe for the first time in years. He'll get better. The doctor's on his way. He'll get better, he repeated, half to himself. Time stretched on. Neither said much. Just that heavy silence, the baby's labored breaths, and the patter of the rain. Augusto stared at Lucas, a deep ache inside. Laura never let go of her brother. Not even when Augusto pressed the cloth to his skin. She wouldn't let anyone else hold him. Augusto respected that. He just sat there, watching, eyes glued to them every second. He felt like one wrong move could spell disaster. Every so often, Laura whispered to God, just barely aloud, for Lucas to hang on. She pressed his little hand between her fingers, softly counting each of his tiny digits, just like their mother used to when they were scared. The baby's heat only kept rising. Augusto felt tears threaten, but fought them down, gripping the arm of the chair so tightly his knuckles whitened. The image of his sick daughter took over, and for a few minutes he was sure he'd lose another small life in that room. The wall clock showed 3 in the morning. Each tick felt like a punch. When the gate squealed and the doctor finally arrived, Augusto forgot all about pride. He flung open the door, called out, begged, and nearly pleaded for him to hurry. He dragged the doctor straight to the room and explained everything in a rush, not caring if he sounded fragile or desperate. The doctor examined Lucas slowly, asking questions Laura answered in a thin, weak voice. Augusto barely blinked, following the man's every move, as if watching could keep Lucas safe. He felt that if anything happened to this baby, he couldn't take it. Not again. When the doctor finished, Augusto understood, for the first time since losing his daughter, what real fear was. Not the kind that comes from emptiness, loneliness, or failure, but a raw terror of losing someone so small, so innocent, someone who couldn't fight for himself. His chest felt too small for all the feeling. And in that instant, he understood the little girl's desperation, the size of the love you can fit inside a child's heart. The waiting room, lit by a harsh white light, made everything look pale. The air smelled like rubbing alcohol and old coffee, and then someone coughed behind a closed door. Laura was sitting on a chair much too big for her. Her feet didn't touch the ground, and the jacket Augusto had found was shaking on her narrow shoulders. The baby, bundled up in her lap again, slept with a faint snore, but his face was still red, his breathing ragged and tired. Augusto paced back and forth across the room. He tried to look calm, but deep furrows showed in his forehead, his jaw set tight, his hand jittery around his phone. He had already called 3 times, asking how much longer it would be. Nobody gave him a straight answer, and each time he hung up, he stared at the wall like he needed to scream. He didn't seem to notice that he glanced at the toy shelf almost nonstop. In the corner, tucked among children's books and scattered games, there was a porcelain doll, one of those old-fashioned ones, blue frilly dress, just like the one. Well, it was identical to the doll that used to sit in his daughter's room, before everything changed. Always there, untouched. Silence again, just the clock ticking away. Suddenly, Laura let out a sigh. It wasn't a cry or a moan, just a long, drawn-out breath, almost adult, coming from such a small girl. She stared at the floor for a while, sort of lost, and then finally found the words. You know, mister, my mom really loved those dolls. Augusto didn't answer, didn't even look. He just stopped pacing, turned his back, fiddling with his wedding ring, the one he spun around his finger whenever he was anxious. Laura held the baby closer. She spoke almost in Lucas's ear, as if giving him courage. The night of the fire, that fire, my mom just wanted to get one doll. She told me, stay here with Lucas and don't move. I'm coming right back. I held on to Lucas. Everyone was crying outside, but she never came out. My neighbor said she'd tried to go back up to the room, risked everything just to get the doll my grandma gave her. Her voice trembled. Maybe she was ashamed to cry, because she scrubbed at her face with her fist for a long time. Augusto turned slowly, bent over a little as if he'd been punched in the gut. His eyes fell on the doll on the shelf, and you could see it in his face. He remembered the smell of his daughter's hair, the way she used to beg him to play, the blue dress, just like that one. Laura spoke in a whisper, staring at the doll, knowing nothing of its past. It was just like that one. Just like it, she said, pointing with her chin, careful not to wake Lucas. Augusto sat down near her, not too close, but closer than he usually did. And for the first time, he wasn't rough. He just kept looking at the girl, seeing in her a small piece of someone he'd lost. His chest felt tight, like he couldn't breathe. He hadn't said anything yet, but you could see his eyes fill with tears, though he pretended to check his watch. Laura could tell he was uneasy, so she kept going, not looking at him, just at the floor. My mom didn't care about money, sir. She just wanted that doll, because it was from her childhood. She used to say that whenever she was sad or scared, she'd sit next to her doll and talk, like the doll understood everything. She'd say, when you're grown up, Laura, I'll give it to you, so you'll never forget that there's someone looking out for you. The silence got so heavy that even the noise from the hospital, people passing, phones ringing, seemed far away. Augusto took a deep breath. He wiped his face with his hand, clasped his hands together like someone praying or fighting something awful inside his own chest. He looked at Laura again, but differently now, as if seeing an ancient secret hidden in a child's face. Maybe he remembered his own little girl, who also talked to her doll, told it secrets, fell asleep holding it tight. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Lucas whimpered in his sleep. Laura repositioned her brother in her lap, rested her face against his hair, and kissed him gently, almost whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll be home soon. Mom's looking after us from far away, I know it." Something deep inside Augusto's soul ached painfully. It was like that girl, and that baby had managed to pry loose a piece of concrete wall he'd built over years. For the first time since his own tragedy, he felt the urge to hold someone close, to protect, to not lose again. Still, Augusto wasn't ready to trust wholeheartedly. The fear of being hurt made his words come out low, but honest. "You'll be all right. I'll make sure of that." But why an object? Why the doll of all things? Laura paused to think, as if searching for the right words. At last, she said, "When you're little and lose everything, anything that belonged to your mom or your family becomes hope. It's like if you hold it tight enough, a piece of their love won't ever die." That hit something deep in Augusto. He bowed his head, closed his eyes. Then he let out a sigh. The sound of rain outside seeped into their silence. In that moment, even without another word spoken, Augusto saw himself in a mirror. There was a wounded child in front of him, but inside him, too. And that old doll, sitting there, now seemed so much heavier, full of worn-out stories, being passed from hand to hand, connecting the fates of people who'd never known each other, people only wanting to feel a bit of family warmth again. The clock kept ticking, minutes passing, but deep in his heart Augusto realized that maybe saving those kids wasn't just about saving them. It was, in some way, about saving himself too. In the days after the scare at the hospital, Augusto barely slept. He moved from his armchair to the window, searching outside as if something was waiting for him in the rain. Laura's face, with those tired, adult eyes in a child's body, kept replaying in his mind. And so did the way Lucas clutched her finger as he slept. Everything about them felt like an old movie, tangled up with memories Augusto never wanted to bring back. Out of nowhere, Augusto found himself thinking about the doll story. A tiny detail, but it hurt. He'd seen that doll on the living room shelf forever. Never had the courage to take it down, but never truly looked at it either. It was just a symbol, something left standing. Now, it was a strange link between him, the girl, and the baby. A link that poked at a place he'd locked up years ago. Driven by stubbornness, Augusto dug into old papers, boxes crammed with stuff from decades past, hoping for some clue. In a ripped envelope, he found an old-school photo. The whole class lined up, some kids grinning, others sulking, and there she was, Clarice. Her name burned into his mind. It was Clarice, Laura's mother. Even in the photo, her eyes had that same light as the girls, and suddenly, everything made sense. Augusto's chest tightened. He remembered those school days, the smell of wooden chairs, Clarice sitting at the back with her shy smile. He'd always had a strange tenderness and admiration for her, but never said a word, just kept it inside. Clarice was the sort who defended shy classmates, helped others without fuss, seemed stronger than most, but everyone noticed when she stopped coming to school. Some said she moved, others whispered about tragedy, but no one went after her. The weight of it all landed on him at once. His throat tightened, as if someone was saying, "You could have done something." He saw in Laura's eyes that same restlessness, a fragile strength trying to hold up the world. It shook him even more, knocked the ground out from under him. In the middle of the night, as the living room clock echoed loud in the silence, Augusto sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands. His head spun, a strange warmth in his eyes. He forced himself to remember his daughter, the smell of her hair after a bath, tiny tears in the car before a medical exam, the silence of their last day. He ached with a bitter sort of longing and, at the same time, a calling, a need to keep another child from ending up the same way, alone, scared, with no one to turn to. Augusto picked up his phone to call someone. He wanted to talk, to ask about Clarice, to chase down more memories. But he just spun the phone in his hand, breathing deep. He didn't know who to call, or even where to start. When he looked out the window, the streetlights blurred in the rain. The air outside felt heavy and cold, as if telling him not to let it all slip away again. The next morning, he came down early. Laura was sitting on the couch, dozing off, her brother stretched across her lap. The baby was coughing softly, and she gently caressed him, trying to soothe him. Even in sleep, she protected Lucas like he was all she had left. Augusto just stood there, watching. Something inside him was at war. On one side, that old distrust. What if they were just taking advantage of him? On the other, a fierce longing to care, to protect, to not fail again. He walked quietly to the kitchen. As he made coffee, the warm smell rising, his hands shook just a little. He thought of Clarice, her laughter in the schoolyard, the time she lent him her sweater because he'd torn his during dodgeball. It wasn't just pity. It was an urge to mend a part of himself, something left unresolved for years. Later, he sat near Laura. She woke with a start, but quickly calmed down, looking at him with those big, tired, wary eyes. Augusto didn't say anything special, just asked if she wanted bread. But Laura hesitated before accepting, as if even that might get her in trouble. That broke something inside him. No child should fear an adult offering food. Again, he felt his own eyes start to sting, hiding it by looking up at the ceiling. Time crawled by that day. Rain tapped at the glass. The living room clock marked every minute without hurry. Augusto sat, flipping through old photos, thinking about all he'd lost through fear or pride. He thought of Clarice, thought of his daughter, thought of that night Laura had come to his door soaked, just wanting a hug for her brother. That was all. No money, no favors, just a hug. The idea of calling social services no longer made sense. The fear of being fooled was giving way to a need to protect them, as if in that moment, nothing else mattered more. The more he watched Lucas coughing and Laura fighting to hold the world together by herself, the more he wanted to start over. He wanted to give them everything he couldn't give his own daughter, or to Clarice, back then. As night fell the next day, Augusto stood frozen in the hallway. Silence pressed in, broken only by Lucas's soft crying and Laura's voice, soothing her brother like a mother. He felt a knot so tight, he could barely breathe. It was as if his whole life had brought him to this moment. One simple request, a lost look, and the past coming back, asking for another chance. And there, for the first time in years, Augusto felt he could answer that call. He stayed there for a long time, unmoving. Only the sound of rain filled the silence pounding inside him. He looked up, for no reason, as if waiting for a miracle or an answer that never came. His face bore not just tiredness, but years of hidden pain. His gaze was heavy, but now, in that instant, something in it was different, more hope than memory. He could still hear Laura's last words from earlier, the way she spoke about her mother, about the doll. She sounded like a grown-up explaining a sorrow, but she was just a child, so small, holding her brother with hands full of fear and love. He couldn't help but think of his own daughter, back when she'd run through the hallways laughing at nothing. For a long time, Augusto thought he'd never feel that again. Now, here he was, feeling everything at once. Too much, too strong. The hallway was cold, but Augusto felt his face burn. He breathed deep, ran a hand over his face, and went into the little bedroom where Laura sat in an oversized armchair, rocking Lucas in her lap. Both of them had been bathed, dressed in borrowed pajamas. Even so, Laura looked tense, as if not daring to believe in rest. She glanced at her brother, at the window, at the door, waiting for someone to come in and take them away. Augusto hesitated at the door, unsure how to begin. He watched Laura settle her brother, pulling the blanket up to his chin. She was trembling, not from the cold, but from fear. He walked over quietly, his heart racing. He paused, adjusted his coat collar as if that might help him find the right words. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than he'd expected. "Laura, could you look at me for a second?" The girl lifted her eyes at once, wide and frightened. For a moment, she shrank back, as if bracing for a scolding, some bit of bad news. "Come here, sit with me," he said, pulling over a chair. She hesitated, hugged Lucas tighter, but went. Augusto felt his throat ache, just seeing how skittish she was, how she glanced around the room, ready to run if she had to. "I know these days here have been hard," he said, looking more at his shoes than at her. "And that you must be scared again, afraid they'll separate you from Lucas." Her eyes filled with tears just hearing that. Augusto saw her small mouth tremble, felt a strange weight in his chest, a mix of pain and longing to protect. "I've been thinking a lot, Laura, about everything. You, your brother, your mom. I remembered things from the past, back when I was happier, more human. And I didn't mean to distrust you. I've lost a lot, you know? When you lose someone, sometimes you're scared to feel again." She was quietly crying now. It was a kind of crying he recognized right away, a child's cry, hearing grown-up promises they don't know if they can believe. He took another deep breath, as if searching for courage inside himself. He moved closer, kneeling so he was at eye level. He took Laura's hand, small and cold in his. For the first time in many years, Augusto's eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm not going to let them separate you. Never. Not ever again." The girl pressed both hands to her face, sobbing with a jumble of fear, relief, everything at once. Still, she didn't let go of her brother, as if Lucas were the last good thing in the world. Augusto stayed there, kneeling, and for the first time in years, felt he was doing something right. He ran his hand through Laura's hair, trying to be gentle, awkward, because it had been so long since he'd done anything like it. He felt the warmth of her tiny hand squeeze back. "I promise, Laura, I swear on all I've lost in this life, you'll never go hungry again. Or cold. Or afraid. You'll live here with me. I want to be your dad, if you'll have me." The girl looked up, as if it took time to understand. Her eyes widened, her little heart pounding so hard he could almost hear it. She nodded, choking back a sob, whispering, "You swear? You won't let them take my brother away?" Augusto couldn't hold back. He started crying too. He pulled Laura into a tight hug, the kind where you're trying to hold up the whole world with your arms. He smelled the cheap shampoo, still mixed with some trace of their hard times, but now it was different, a smell of beginning. "No, Laura, nobody's taking Lucas from you. You'll stay together. I'll look after you. I promise." The baby, even sleeping, made a tiny sound, squirmed, nestling in. Laura kissed her brother's forehead, tears trickling down. Augusto realized it was more than gratitude. It was hope, small, just starting to grow. Outside, the rain eased off. The wind brushed lightly against the windows. Inside that little room, the air felt different, almost warm, as if all the bad things had been left outside in the dark. Augusto stayed there, holding them both. And in that embrace, meant only as comfort, it felt like some lost piece of his heart had come home. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. All that mattered was to feel, to hold on, to promise what he'd never been able to promise before, that he'd never leave those children alone in the world again. Early the next morning, a shaft of sunlight warmed the bedroom window, and Augusto woke with a strange feeling, as if he'd left behind a heavy burden, as if a gentle relief settled in his chest. The familiar silence in the house was gone. In its place was something new, a light giggle, weaving through the echoing hallways. At first Augusto thought it was in his head, but then he heard it again. It was Laura. Barefoot on the cold floor, he followed the sound twisted playfully through the rooms. On the living room carpet, scattered toy blocks, a one-eyed teddy, a broken toy car, things he'd had delivered the day before, never thinking they'd really be used. And there, sitting on the floor, was Laura, laughing. A soft, shy laugh as she bounced Lucas in her arms. The boy no longer had that awful cough from when he arrived. His cheeks were rosy, his eyes curious. He kicked his little legs, excited by a blue rattle, and Laura mimicked the sound, trying to coax another smile from him. Augusto leaned against the door, just watching. A knot rose in his throat. How many years had it been since laughter like that sounded in this house? He couldn't even remember. He stood there, just soaking it in. Laura noticed him, hesitated. She almost seemed to expect a scolding, a quiet down, like people used to shout at her on the street, if they bothered noticing at all. But Augusto smiled. Not on purpose, a crooked, rusty smile. Laura, with the shyness of someone still doubting her luck, smiled back, then returned to playing, testing the boundaries of this new home. Soon the kitchen aroma filled the air, something never felt there before, fresh bread out of the oven, warm milk. Laura was called by the housekeeper, Donna Lucia, who treated her with a grandmother's tenderness. Laura wasn't sure if she could go. She looked at Augusto, asking for permission with her eyes alone. He nodded, and she went little steps, shuffling in borrowed slippers, Lucas bundled serenely in her arms. At the table, Laura stared at all that food, taking a while to believe it was meant for her and her brother. She took a small piece of bread first, chewing slowly. She ate with respect, afraid it would disappear too soon. Donna Lucia told her about the days when Augusto was a child, making a point of sharing. Laura listened carefully, eating in small bites, eyes always on Lucas. Augusto just watched from the door. So many simple things, so far from his life. Only now did he see how much they mattered. The sound of laughter over breakfast, Lucas banging his spoon, Lucia telling stories. The world's noise faded, even the rain of the night before had passed, leaving everything smelling like wet earth. After breakfast, Laura wanted to help. Asked for a rag to clean the table. Donna Lucia insisted it wasn't necessary, but Laura did it anyway. She moved gently over the smooth floor, sweeping up crumbs with care, as if a bit of mess could ruin everything. In the backyard, Augusto assembled a wooden rocking horse he'd left in storage since before his daughter's tragedy. When he carried it outside, his heart clenched hard. He remembered his daughter's face, how she'd sit cross-legged in the yard, making up stories. For a second, he thought he'd break down. But Laura looked up at him, wide eyes full of hope. "Is that for us, sir?" Augusto just nodded, swallowing hard, turning his face away. Laura propped Lucas in her lap, eased herself onto the rocking horse, and pulled her brother up too. He squealed with delight, surprise. Laura began rocking gently, keeping her arms tight around him, like a mother. And Augusto, something inside him stirred. It was small, but insistent, a warmth in his chest, rising to his eyes. He didn't know if he should laugh or cry. The creak of the wood, sun on the porch, children's laughter, all of it seemed to slowly wash away the cold of the past years. In the living room, Augusto picked up a box full of old toys. He thought, maybe it was time to open up, not just to the new, but to all that had passed as well. He sat down on the floor next to Laura. He showed her a porcelain doll identical to the one he'd kept hidden for so long. Laura looked at it, her fingers trembling, and touched it as if she were touching a precious memory. "My mom had one just like this," she whispered. Augusto fell silent, eyes downcast. Suddenly, Laura came closer, resting her head gently on Augusto's shoulder. He froze. Her touch was light, as if asking for permission to exist. They sat like that, quietly, for a long while. Lucas, exhausted from so much play, began to doze off in her arms. His eyelids closed, his breathing deep and peaceful. Laura wrapped him up, looked at Augusto, and spoke in a tiny, grateful voice, tinged with the fear of shattering the moment. "Sir, is this for real? Are we really going to live here?" Augusto took a breath. The knot in his throat tightened. He wanted to say everything, but nothing came out. Instead, he stroked her hair, a silent promise. The house that had once been only walls and silence now harbored the scent of bread, the sounds of children, toys scattered even under the sofa. Every laugh from Laura and Lucas was like opening a new window for the sun. By the end of the day, Augusto realized he was laughing, really laughing, out loud, something he hadn't done in a very, very long time. The phone rang, but he didn't move. For the first time in years, nothing felt more urgent than being there, in the middle of the toys, listening to life begin again. The orphanage's main hall looked different that day. The walls were freshly painted, but what stood out most was the floral scent from bouquets lined up on the floor. Lots of people had gathered, neighborhood residents, orphanage staff, neighbors of the mansion, and plenty of curious onlookers who'd only heard stories about the millionaire who'd changed overnight. The day was bright, sky half clouded, a chilly breeze pushing through the windows, mixing with the murmurs of so many voices. Augusto stood at Laura's side. He wore a suit, but looked uncomfortable, as if the jacket bothered him more than the early winter chill. He held Lucas in his arms, now and then straightening the baby's little cap, checking every detail as if to guarantee nothing bad would ever happen to these two again. All eyes were on them. Laura, shy, squeezed Augusto's hand tight, her fingers stained with paint from the decorations she had made for the new wing, gripping his large, steady hand. He noticed. A flush of emotion rose in his chest. He thought of his daughter, of how long it had been since a child's hand had trusted him so completely. There was background noise, chairs scraping, other children giggling, people coughing from nerves or anticipation. But in the middle of it all, when Augusto's name was called at the microphone, time seemed to stop. Silence fell. Augusto took a deep breath, looked at Laura, then closed his eyes for an instant. Something inside him trembled. It wasn't fear. It was longing, mixed with pride, mixed with regret, a tangled mess he couldn't have explained even if someone asked. Everyone expected a speech, but the words stumbled. He glanced again at the plaque, covered by a white cloth, and started, his voice low and a little rough. "Today we do things differently," he said. "Today we remember those we lost and hold close those who remain." Laura looked up at him, eyes bright with tears, and gave him a timid smile, a small, lopsided smile, but enough to show she understood without needing any more words. Then Augusto pulled off the cloth. The only sound was the fabric sliding, then a collective gasp. The names were there, Isabella Ribeiro Wing and Ana Paula dos Santos Wing. One name from Augusto's past. The name of the daughter he lost, but also Laura and Lucas's mother, the classmate he'd so long admired, who now, impossibly, was woven into his story again. There were people who cried right there. It wasn't easy seeing such a big man choke up, but his eyes were full of tears. When he read the names out loud, his voice shook. He drew Laura closer, and Lucas gave a little giggle, maybe understanding nothing, just feeling the warmth in those strong arms. It was the first time Augusto had ever spoken his daughter's name in public since the accident. It took effort, but he did it. And, somehow, it felt like that alone lifted a weight from him. So much was left unsaid. People whispered, not everyone knew the full story. Others only felt the impact of this gesture. Photos lined the wall, old dolls, restored toys, storybooks, all selected by Laura. Even a porcelain doll, almost identical to the one Ana Paula had tried to save from the fire. Laura stood in awe, staring at the doll. So did Augusto. It was as if past and present had finally made peace. He felt a strange relief, as if he'd finally taken a deep breath after ages. Out of the blue, an elderly woman from the crowd, a friend of Laura's mother, shuffled up and hugged Augusto. It lasted a long time. They stood quietly, each holding tight to keep from breaking down. She whispered thank you. Augusto almost couldn't breathe. He felt the pain inside him turn into something else, a huge desire to protect. When the event was over, a crowd of children ran to play in the new room. Laura dropped Augusto's hand just to go join them, and Lucas beamed a toothless grin at the sight of all those toys. Augusto stayed back, just watching. He thought of his daughter sculpting sandcastles, her laughter. He thought of Ana Paula, her courage, her choices, and understood, in a strange, miraculous way, that love travels through time, turns corners, loops back to comfort us when and where we least expect. The clouds parted a little. A slant of sunlight glinted off the golden plaque, lighting up both names side by side. Augusto ran a hand over his face, covertly wiped away a tear. It wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. For finding a new family, all because a grubby little girl once knocked at his door and asked for a hug. He looked around at everyone, breathed deep, and, without a word, smiled a slow, crooked smile that no longer felt the need to hide. That moment, he realized he was changing, and that he would never be alone again. In the end, As everyone was leaving and the orphanage was emptying out, Augusto stayed there, gazing at the sign, one hand in his pocket and the other tightly clutching Laura's small hand, feeling her warmth. An old millionaire, but now, finally, a real father. The sun feels delicious on that porch. It's a morning that seems made just for them. Laura's sitting right where she can look out over the garden. She's holding Lucas in her lap while he plays with his chubby little fingers, giggling that lopsided laugh only babies make. After so many cold nights, after so much fear, so many tears hidden under bridges, today all they feel is warmth in their chests. It's as if, in this patch of sunlight, everything is finally at peace. There's no cold wind, no danger, no one looking at them with suspicion, just the sweet smell of flowers and fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. Augusto is wearing a suit, but he no longer looks like that stern, shut-off man from a few weeks ago. People say he's changed, and you can really see it. He sits down close to the kids on the steps, still a little awkward, not quite sure how to play. But he tries. There was a time when he wouldn't go anywhere near a toy or a child's laughter. Now he's there, holding a silly puppet, making funny voices to make Lucas laugh. Barefoot on the cold floor, he followed the sound twisted playfully through the rooms. On the living room carpet, scattered toy blocks, a one-eyed teddy, a broken toy car, things he'd had delivered the day before, never thinking they'd really be used. And there, sitting on the floor, was Laura, laughing. A soft, shy laugh as she bounced Lucas in her arms. The boy no longer had that awful cough from when he arrived. His cheeks were rosy, his eyes curious. He kicked his little legs, excited by a blue rattle, and Laura mimicked the sound, trying to coax another smile from him. Augusto leaned against the door, just watching. A knot rose in his throat. How many years had it been since laughter like that sounded in this house? He couldn't even remember. He stood there, just soaking it in. Laura noticed him, hesitated. She almost seemed to expect a scolding, a quiet down, like people used to shout at her on the street, if they bothered noticing at all. But Augusto smiled. Not on purpose, a crooked, rusty smile. Laura, with the shyness of someone still doubting her luck, smiled back, then returned to playing, testing the boundaries of this new home. Soon the kitchen aroma filled the air, something never felt there before, fresh bread out of the oven, warm milk. Laura was called by the housekeeper, Donna Lucia, who treated her with a grandmother's tenderness. Laura wasn't sure if she could go. She looked at Augusto, asking for permission with her eyes alone. He nodded, and she went little steps, shuffling in borrowed slippers, Lucas bundled serenely in her arms. At the table, Laura stared at all that food, taking a while to believe it was meant for her and her brother. She took a small piece of bread first, chewing slowly. She ate with respect, afraid it would disappear too soon. Donna Lucia told her about the days when Augusto was a child, making a point of sharing. Laura listened carefully, eating in small bites, eyes always on Lucas. Augusto just watched from the door. So many simple things, so far from his life. Only now did he see how much they mattered. The sound of laughter over breakfast, Lucas banging his spoon, Lucia telling stories. The world's noise faded. Even the rain of the night before had passed, leaving everything smelling like wet earth. After breakfast, Laura wanted to help. Asked for a rag to clean the table. Donna Lucia insisted it wasn't necessary, but Laura did it anyway. She moved gently over the smooth floor, sweeping up crumbs with care, as if a bit of mess could ruin everything. In the backyard, Augusto assembled a wooden rocking horse he'd left in storage since before his daughter's tragedy. When he carried it outside, his heart clenched hard. He remembered his daughter's face, how she'd sit cross-legged in the yard, making up stories. For a second, he thought he'd break down. But Laura looked up at him, wide eyes full of hope. "Is that for us, sir?" Augusto just nodded, swallowing hard, turning his face away. Laura propped Lucas in her lap, eased herself onto the rocking horse, and pulled her brother up too. He squealed with delight, surprise. Laura began rocking gently, keeping her arms tight around him, like a mother. And Augusto, something inside him stirred. It was small, but insistent, a warmth in his chest, rising to his eyes. He didn't know if he should laugh or cry. The creak of the wood, sun on the porch, children's laughter, all of it seemed to slowly wash away the cold of the past years. In the living room, Augusto picked up a box full of old toys. He thought, maybe it was time to open up, not just to the new, but to all that had passed as well. He sat down on the floor next to Laura. He showed her a porcelain doll identical to the one he'd kept hidden for so long. Laura looked at it, her fingers trembling, and touched it as if she were touching a precious memory. "My mom had one just like this," she whispered. Augusto fell silent, eyes downcast. Suddenly, Laura came closer, resting her head gently on Augusto's shoulder. He froze. Her touch was light, as if asking for permission to exist. They sat like that, quietly, for a long while. Lucas, exhausted from so much play, began to doze off in her arms. His eyelids closed, his breathing deep and peaceful. Laura wrapped him up, looked at Augusto, and spoke in a tiny, grateful voice, tinged with the fear of shattering the moment. "Sir, is this for real? Are we really going to live here?" Augusto took a breath. The knot in his throat tightened. He wanted to say everything, but nothing came out. Instead, he stroked her hair, a silent promise. The house that had once been only walls and silence now harbored the scent of bread, the sounds of children, toys scattered even under the sofa. Every laugh from Laura and Lucas was like opening a new window for the sun. By the end of the day, Augusto realized he was laughing, really laughing, out loud, something he hadn't done in a very, very long time. The phone rang, but he didn't move. For the first time in years, nothing felt more urgent than being there, in the middle of the toys, listening to life begin again. The orphanage's main hall looked different that day. The walls were freshly painted, but what stood out most was the floral scent from bouquets lined up on the floor. Lots of people had gathered, neighborhood residents, orphanage staff, neighbors of the mansion, and plenty of curious onlookers who'd only heard stories about the millionaire who'd changed overnight. The day was bright, sky half-clouded, a chilly breeze pushing through the windows, mixing with the murmurs of so many voices. Augusto stood at Laura's side. He wore a suit, but looked uncomfortable, as if the jacket bothered him more than the early winter chill. He held Lucas in his arms, now and then straightening the baby's little cap, checking every detail as if to guarantee nothing bad would ever happen to these two again. All eyes were on them. Laura, shy, squeezed Augusto's hand tight, her fingers stained with paint from the decorations she had made for the new wing, gripping his large, steady hand. He noticed. A flush of emotion rose in his chest. He thought of his daughter, of how long it had been since a child's hand had trusted him so completely. There was background noise, chairs scraping, other children giggling, people coughing from nerves or anticipation. But in the middle of it all, when Augusto's name was called at the microphone, time seemed to stop. Silence fell. Augusto took a deep breath, looked at Laura, then closed his eyes for an instant. Something inside him trembled. It wasn't fear. It was longing, mixed with pride, mixed with regret, a tangled mess he couldn't have explained even if someone asked. Everyone expected a speech, but the words stumbled. He glanced again at the plaque, covered by a white cloth, and started, his voice low and a little rough. "Today we do things differently," he said. "Today we remember those we lost and hold close those who remain." Laura looked up at him, eyes bright with tears, and gave him a timid smile, a small, lopsided smile, but enough to show she understood without needing any more words. Then Augusto pulled off the cloth. The only sound was the fabric sliding, then a collective gasp. The names were there, Isabella Ribeiro Wing and Ana Paula dos Santos Wing. One name from Augusto's past. The name of the daughter he lost, but also Laura and Lucas's mother, the classmate he'd so long admired, who now, impossibly, was woven into his story again. There were people who cried right there. It wasn't easy seeing such a big man choke up, but his eyes were full of tears. When he read the names out loud, his voice shook. He drew Laura closer, and Lucas gave a little giggle, maybe understanding nothing, just feeling the warmth in those strong arms. It was the first time Augusto had ever spoken his daughter's name in public since the accident. It took effort, but he did it. And, somehow, it felt like that alone lifted a weight from him. So much was left unsaid. People whispered, not everyone knew the full story. Others only felt the impact of this gesture. Photos lined the wall, old dolls, restored toys, storybooks, all selected by Laura. Even a porcelain doll, almost identical to the one Ana Paula had tried to save from the fire. Laura stood in awe, staring at the doll. So did Augusto. It was as if past and present had finally made peace. He felt a strange relief, as if he'd finally taken a deep breath after ages. Out of the blue, an elderly woman from the crowd, a friend of Laura's mother, shuffled up and hugged Augusto. It lasted a long time. They stood quietly, each holding tight to keep from breaking down. She whispered thank you. Augusto almost couldn't breathe. He felt the pain inside him turn into something else, a huge desire to protect. When the event was over, a crowd of children ran to play in the new room. Laura dropped Augusto's hand just to go join them, and Lucas beamed a toothless grin at the sight of all those toys. Augusto stayed back, just watching. He thought of his daughter sculpting sandcastles, her laughter. He thought of Ana Paula, her courage, her choices, and understood, in a strange, miraculous way, that love travels through time, turns corners, loops back to comfort us when and where we least expect. The clouds parted a little. A slant of sunlight glinted off the golden plaque, lighting up both names side by side. Augusto ran a hand over his face, covertly wiped away a tear. It wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. For finding a new family, all because a grubby little girl once knocked at his door and asked for a hug. He looked around at everyone, breathed deep, and, without a word, smiled a slow, crooked smile that no longer felt the need to hide. That moment, he realized he was changing, and that he would never be alone again. In the end, as everyone was leaving and the orphanage was emptying out, Augusto stayed there, gazing at the sign, one hand in his pocket and the other tightly clutching Laura's small hand, feeling her warmth. An old millionaire, but now, finally, a real father. The sun feels delicious on that porch,